Hey everybody, and welcome back to another lecture with Coding with Roby. In this lecture, we're going to authenticate users when they try and sign in. To be able to do this, we're going to have to verify the password hash by verifying the new password that they typed in to try and log in with the hashed password. We're going to have to authenticate the user, and then we're going to have to return back if the authentication process worked or not. So let's jump in and let's authenticate some users. Now the first thing we're going to need to do is import from FastAPI Security the OAuth password request form. And when a user tries to sign in, they're going to be signing in with the OAuth 2 password request form. We now want to create a new function right under get password hash and create this function to be called verify password. We can do this by typing in def verify password, and it's going to take in two parameters. A plain password, which is a password they're trying to say is their password, and a hash password, which we're going to retrieve from the database. We can then return our bcrypt context as there's a function in there called verify, which will be able to verify if the plain password and the hashed password are actually the same. And right under verify password, let's create a new function called authenticate user. Authenticate user is going to take in a username, a password, and a database instance. We're first going to look through the database to see if the username matches with any record. And then we're going to try and verify by using the verify password function that we just created if the hash password and the password are valid. If not, we're going to return a false, and if it is, we're going to return the user that we just found. We can do this by saying def authenticate user, passing in the username, password, and database instance. User equals db.query, and as the parameter, we're going to say models.users. .filter models.users.username equals username dot first. If not user, return false. And if not verify password with password and user hash password, also return false. If they both pass, then we'll return the user. And now lastly, we want to create one more function, an API request under app.post create new user. We want this one to be an @app.post request method also with the string URL of token. We then want to create the new function called login for access token, which in the long term, we're going to return the access token or the JSON web token back to the client so they can call future requests with this token. But for now, we're going to say async def login for access token. We're going to say a form data of type OAuth 2 password request form equals depends. And then a database or a DB of type session, which equals depends get DB. We then want to say user equals authenticate user with the form data username and form data password and the database instance. And if the user is not valid, then we want to raise the HTTP exception with the status code 404 user not found. And if the user is valid, then we just want to return user is validated. Alright, now this looks like a lot, but let's save our file and make sure our server is running, and let's swap back to our Swagger docs and refresh our page. We can see that there's a new post request called token login for access token. And if we come back here, we can see that it needs a username and a password. If we say try it out, we can say our username is going to be coding with Roby and our password is test1234 exclamation mark. If I click execute, we can see it says user validated. However, let's change the password and add ABC at the end. Execute. User not found. And let's change the password back. And let's add an extra Y to coding with Roby. Execute. User not found. But when we have an appropriate username and password, everything is validated properly. The token API is getting called, which is login for access token, which we receive form data for username and password, and then we create a database instance. We say user is equal to authenticate user, and we pass in the username and password in DB. Within authenticate user, we get the username and password in DB. We do a query based on the username to find the first record with the username, and remember, our usernames are also unique. If the user is not found, we'll return a false. And if not verify password with our password and user hash password, return false as well. This calls this function where we have passed in our plain text of test1234 exclamation mark and hash password is the password they get from the database. We verify that the plain password and the hashed password match, and then we return our user back down to here. If user is null or empty, we throw an exception. If not, we say user is validated because user is equivalent to some type of data. This wraps up the lecture on how we can authenticate a user. However, we still need to add to this. We need to create a token and be able to pass a token back to the client so that they can then access new APIs by authenticating and using authorization with the JWT token. This wraps up this lecture, and I'll see you in the next video.